The Australian government has committed to cutting emissions by up to 70% on 2005 levels by the year 2035. Now, environmental groups say that it's not ambitious enough, and business groups say that it's too much. But here's the question nobody seems to be asking, and that's the question, is it even physically possible? My name is Richard, and welcome back to Ronc Industries, the industry blog for investors where we're pro-wealth, pro-growth, and pro-industry. And today we're not doing politics. We're going to be doing some math again. We're going to take a look at Australia's plan to cut emissions by 70% by 2035 and what that would really look like. So let's dive in. So let's start with some context because the numbers here are genuinely really interesting. As of 2023, Australia ranks 19th in the world for carbon dioxide emissions. 19th. Now, and our global contribution overall, it's just 0.096%, less than 1% of total global emissions. Now let's look at who's above us. We've got China at 33.98 or 34% of global emissions, and that's up 262% since the year 2000. You've got the United States at 12%, and they're actually down 21% since the year 2000. Credit where it's due. India, 7.5%, nearly up 200% on previous statistics. And then there's Australia, sitting at 0.96%, with a net increase of about 5.29% since the year 2000. Now, to be fair, it could be substantially worse if nothing had been done on an industrial level. And looking at it from 2005, emissions have actually dropped by 2.8% over the last 20 years. 2.8% in 20 years. And the Australian government's plan is now to cut a further 67.2% in just the next 10. Now let's talk about what that would actually require. Australia's 2005 emissions sat at 384 million tonnes of carbon dioxide. A 70% reduction means removing 268 million tonnes from the country's annualized output. Now, we've covered this in a previous video already. Combustion doesn't just produce carbon dioxide, it produces water as well. Now, the ratios are roughly around about 3:1. For every unit of carbon dioxide produced, you've burned approximately 3 times that in carbon-based fuel by mass. So 268 million tonnes of carbon dioxide, that reduction actually means 89.6 million tonnes of carbon-based fuel needs to come out of the supply chain. Now, when we convert that to barrels at around about 119.25 or 120 kilograms per barrel for round numbers, we're looking at around about 751 million barrels of fuel that need to disappear from Australia's energy mix. Now, here's the plot twist. Australia currently consumes around about 1.1 million barrels of oil per day. That's roughly 401 million barrels per year. Now, the shortfall here, that's 350 million barrels. That's not a rounding error. That's the entire foundation of Australian heavy industry. To meet this target, you would almost certainly need to phase out both natural gas and coal entirely within 10 years. This isn't a transition. This is a structured, planned shutdown. And all of this for a global emission reduction equivalent to around about 0.7%, while China, India, and Indonesia continue to grow theirs. All right, so let's be fair. Let's actually engage with the question. If you had to hit this target, what would it really take? Option 1, nuclear. Now, this is the most obvious answer. It's got extremely high energy density, zero operational emissions, proven at scale across dozens of countries. The precedent exists. But Australia's appetite for nuclear is lukewarm at best, and that's even on a social level. It's essentially off the table politically, which means we've just got to move on. Option 2 is carbon pricing. And this is where things get interesting because this is apparently the preferred mechanism to unlock the private sector by pricing carbon. Now, I have to say with some irony that pricing your way out of a physical problem is perhaps one of the most Australian things I've ever heard. So let's run the numbers on it. At $1 per kilogram of carbon dioxide, that's a windfall north of around about $380 billion per year. Now, even if 100% of that went straight back into research and development, which it absolutely wouldn't, private industry would still be trying to overcome physics itself to build a commercially viable new energy source and deploy it nationally within a decade. So what actually happens? That money is probably going to flow into imported renewables. No domestic manufacturing, no new industry. Just an enormous transfer of wealth to solve a problem that the numbers suggest may not be solvable on this timeline under any realistic scenario. Now, as a reference point, petrol prices using this model would push toward $4 Australian per litre. There goes private transport, and with it, a meaningful chunk of people's quality of life. Now, option 3 is landing on intermittent renewables. With nuclear energy off the table and carbon-based fuels potentially being sunset within a decade, this is where we're going to end up. And that's intermittent renewables, which by definition don't always produce when you need them. And no matter how much financial pressure is put on industry or consumers, you can't legislate your way to baseload power from weather-dependent sources without credible storage solutions that don't exist yet at the scale that they're required on. Now, to me, this is where it all gets really revealing. The government has committed $5 billion for decarbonisation, $1 billion for a clean fuel fund, $2 billion to accelerate renewable rollout. Now that's $8 billion in total. Now let's compare that to what Australia spent on disability benefits in financial year 23-24, which was $41.5 billion in a single year on a single benefit program. So here the government is only committing $8 billion over multiple years to restructure the entire energy and industrial base of a continent-sized economy. So that leads us to one of two things being true. The first is that the government hasn't done the impact analysis, that this target is fundamentally arbitrary, a number chosen to satisfy environmental groups with no grounding in industrial or technical reality. The second is that they have done the analysis and they know it's simply not achievable, much like the 2030 target before it. And with only $8 billion on the table and hydrogen projects already failing in the field, they know as well as anyone that the private industry doesn't have an answer to this problem either. The failing hydrogen projects aren't a minor footnote, they're the evidence. So where does this actually leave us? Australia contributes 0.96% of global emissions, emissions that have dropped 2.8% in the last 20 years. The goal is now to drop a further 67.2% in the next 10. The math doesn't support it. The funding doesn't support it, and the technology doesn't support it. And the only question worth asking at this point is a simple one. Which is it? Is this incompetence or is it theatre? Because the answer changes what comes next. I'm Richard, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.